To further unify his kingdoms and to demonstrate his royal power, King Alfred embarked on two new projects. In the early 890s, King Alfred ordered that a chronicle of the Anglo-Saxons from Roman times to his own be compiled. It emphasized their common heritage from early Christian times. It also stressed how the West Saxon kings had assumed control by divine wish. King Alfred's second project was even more far-reaching. He had committed to record his code of law.
First, we enjoin what is of most importance, that a man be bound by his pledge and oath. If anyone is compelled by oath to an evil act such as treason or treachery, it is better they leave the act undone. However, if a man is pledged to a deed he does not fulfill, he must hand all his possessions to his friends and humbly submit to prison for 40 days at the king's estate. If a man refuses to go to prison and has to be forced, he forfeits his possessions. If he escapes, he is to be outlawed and excommunicated.
The making of laws established the king's desire for peace and justice. As well as capital offences, Alfred developed the system covering punishment by fine and compensation to victims.
If any man plots against the king's life, or supports fugitives or the king's enemies, he is to pay with his life. If any man fights or draws weapons in the king's hall, the king is to have judgment of life or death over him. If anyone openly ignores the church's law during Lent without permission, they must pay compensation of 120 shillings. If any man disturbs a public meeting by drawing a weapon, the fine is 120 shillings to his ealdorman. I, Alfred, King of the West Saxons, showed my councillors these laws, and they were happy to agree to them.
As king, his duties were widespread, overseeing his court, household and government. King Alfred also attended judicial hearings, received foreign diplomats, planned new buildings, and still somehow found time to hunt. However, his oath to divide his time equally between his God and his kingdom presented a problem. There was no way that the daylight and night hours could be measured. King Alfred came up with a solution. According to Asser, the king ordered a quantity of wax to be purchased, weighed, and divided to make 6 candles. Each candle was 12 inches tall. King Alfred then had each candle marked at inch intervals. When lit, the candles burnt at the rate of an inch an hour, the marks providing a guide to the passing of time. King Alfred further instructed that the candles should be placed in lanterns made of wood and ox horn. This prevented the candles being blown out or burning too quickly in a draught. Thus Alfred was able to keep his oath to God. He took equal care in the division of his revenue. The annual revenue King Alfred gathered from taxation was divided into halves. The first half was for the maintenance of his kingdom. A third went to pay his nobles and soldiers. A third was reserved for payment of craftsmen and skilled artisans. The last third was reserved for gifts and charity. The second half of Alfred's revenue was bequeathed to the church. Divided into 4 equal parts, the money went to the upkeep of his school, the 2 religious houses he had founded, alms for the poor, and finally a general fund for the upkeep of the church. In 892 AD, Alfred's lookouts in Kent saw a familiar sight: the dreaded sails of a Viking fleet. Defeat and famine had pushed 2 desperate Viking armies to leave the continent and sail for England. The 2 fleets crossed the Channel and divided. One fleet struck into southern Kent and embarked at Appledore. The other fleet sailed around East Kent and made landfall at Milton Regis. King Alfred's scouts followed their progress and reported their movements. Once again, King Alfred called out his army, perhaps taking solace from the Psalms he had recently translated.
O Lord, Why are there so many of my enemies who afflict me? Why do so many rise up against me? Many say to my spirit, it has no protection from God. But it is not as they say. Rather, you without doubt are my shield and glory. Therefore I do not now fear the multitudes of the enemy, although they surround me. For you, O Lord, arise and make me safe.
Unfortunately, accounts of what followed are confusing. Alfred led his army into Kent and took up position near Rochester. From here, he could see the Vikings' fortified position at Milton. Alfred's son Edward was entrusted with an army to watch over the Vikings in South Kent. A stalemate ensued, with neither side willing to commit itself to battle. King Alfred, seeing this, attempted a diplomatic solution. He opened negotiations with the Viking leader, Haston. In exchange for a large sum of gold, Haston agreed to take his forces beyond the Danelaw. To cement the agreement, Haston's 2 sons were baptized under Alfred's sponsorship. By Easter 893 AD, the Vikings in North Kent had sailed to the shores of Essex. The Vikings in South Kent now divided. The fleet put to sea to sail to East Anglia. A mounted force of warriors made a raid through Kent, aiming to pick up booty and cross into the Danelaw. By the time they reached Farnham, Alfred's son Edward was almost upon them and anxious to prove himself. As soon as he could, Edward attacked. In the vanguard, Edward's bravery inspired his men. The Vikings fell back in confusion. They left behind all their plunder and prisoners. During the battle, the Viking leader was wounded. The Vikings managed to withdraw to Thorney Island in the Thames. Edward's victorious army was quick to follow up its advantage. The Vikings, to their despair, found themselves surrounded. King Alfred's army was approaching from the west. The Vikings were trapped. Incredibly, the Vikings were able to escape. King Alfred had received word that a Viking army was attacking Devon. He immediately turned all his forces westward to counter the threat. Meanwhile, Edward's army left the siege, having served their allocated time in the army. The Vikings retired into Essex. The Viking attacks in the west petered out without a major engagement. King Alfred launched assaults across the Danelaw into Essex, defeating the Viking army and destroying their stronghold at Benfleet. By changing the style of Saxon defence and launching attacks against Viking strongholds, King Alfred negated the effect of Viking raids. While he could not stop the Vikings from entering his kingdom, once in, he could quickly contain them. By 896 AD, the Vikings had had enough. Once more they set their sails for the continent and left for easier victories. King Alfred was now 47. He had 3 more years to live. Right to the last, King Alfred was still studying and translating. He died aged 50 on the 26th of October, 899. The significance of King Alfred's reign was not evident to the Anglo-Saxons. His achievements gradually came to be recognized during the Middle Ages. King Alfred became all things to all men, a romantic hero, father of the navy, founder of the English state, creator of English law. His heroic stand against the Vikings was held up as a mirror to princely behavior. It was not until the 16th century that he became known as Alfred the Great, and from then on, his place in English history was assured. 1,000 years after his death, King Alfred was a Victorian schoolboy hero. To the modern world, he is remembered, if at all, as a king who burnt some cakes. What King Alfred would have made of his future popularity, we cannot know. Surviving documents he wrote give us glimpses of a man committed to his God, his law, his people, and his children. We are left with a curious picture of a man who would lead his warriors into a ferocious battle one day and spend hours studying a Latin text the next. A chronicler descended from his brother wrote the following in the late 10th century. Perhaps in these few words, we have a measure of King Alfred's greatness. In the year of our Lord 899, there passed from this world King Alfred of the Saxons, unshakable pillar of the people of the West, a man full of justice, active in war, wise in speech, studied in sacred literature over all things. For he translated unknown numbers of books from Latin to his own tongue, with such variety and skill that not only scholars, but any who could might hear it read. The king died on the 7th day before All Saints, and his body rests in peace at Winchester. Only say, reader, Redeemer Christ, save his soul.